September 1944, above Borneo. Major Richard Ira Bong eased his P-38 Lightning into a shallow dive, twin Allison engines purring with 3,000 combined horsepower as he scanned the sky below through his bulletproof windscreen. Japanese fighters were climbing desperately toward a formation of American B-24 Liberators, unaware that one of the deadliest fighter pilots in American history was already positioning himself above them. What the Japanese pilots didn't know was that the quiet, unassuming farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin, now tracking them through his gun sight, had already destroyed dozens of enemy aircraft in combat. His reputation had spread across the Pacific like wildfire. But Bong wasn't a man who bragged. He was methodical, patient, calculating. Each time he took off, it was less about glory and more about precision. In the distance, tracer rounds arced upward, red streaks of desperation from the enemy below. Bong adjusted his trim, his fingers light on the throttle. He had learned early that to win in the sky wasn't about rage or fear. It was about rhythm. The rhythm of the engines, the rhythm of the target's movement, and the rhythm of breathing between bursts of gunfire. By the time this mission ended, he would add another victory to his tally. By the time the war ended, his name would become legend, America's top-scoring ace, with 40 confirmed aerial victories. But that legend didn't begin with skill or luck. It began years earlier, far from the Pacific, in the quiet stillness of a Wisconsin farm, where a boy learned to chase birds, drive tractors, and respect the wind. Because before he was the deadliest pilot in the Pacific, Richard Bong was just a farm kid, one who loved the sky more than anything else on Earth. Long before the roar of twin engines and the flash of tracer rounds, Richard Bong's story began on a small dairy farm near Poplar, Wisconsin, a place where the horizon stretched endlessly, and the only sound at dawn was the cry of gulls and the steady rhythm of wind through the fields. His father, Carl Bong, was a hardworking farmer, and his mother, Dora, often joked that Richard learned to look at the sky before he learned to walk straight. As a child, Richard would lie on the barn roof for hours, watching crop dusters dance low across the fields. To him, they weren't just machines, they were alive, graceful, and free. While most boys his age dreamed of baseball or hunting, Bong was obsessed with how things flew. He built model airplanes out of scrap wood and paper, testing each one against the prairie winds until they glided perfectly. That curiosity became obsession when a military training plane roared overhead one summer afternoon. The silver wings gleamed in the sunlight, and Bong watched, mesmerized, as it banked smoothly against the horizon. He ran all the way home and told his mother, breathless, "I'm going to fly one of those someday." She smiled, unaware that her son had just chosen a destiny that would carry him halfway around the world. When war broke out in Europe, Bong enrolled at Superior State Teachers College, but spent every spare minute at the local airfield, paying for lessons by cleaning hangars and fueling planes. His instructors quickly noticed something rare, an instinctive understanding of flight. He wasn't just a natural, he felt the aircraft like an extension of himself. By 1941, he entered the Army Air Corps Aviation Cadet Program. Training wasn't easy. Bong wasn't the loudest or the boldest. In fact, he was often quiet, even shy around his squad mates. But once he strapped into the cockpit, something changed. The calm farm boy disappeared, replaced by a pilot who seemed to anticipate danger before it happened. He struggled at first, his landings were rough, and instructors scolded him for being too cautious. But Bong absorbed every lesson, every failure. He studied the mechanics of his aircraft, memorized wind patterns, and practiced aiming with uncanny discipline. And then one afternoon, he stunned everyone. During an air gunnery exercise, Bong hit every target with surgical precision, every burst, every pass. Perfect. His instructor simply nodded and said, "Bong, I think you just found your rhythm." By the time Bong earned his wings in January 1942, America was at war. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had changed everything. The calm skies of Wisconsin were gone. Now, the world was burning. When Bong was assigned to the 49th Fighter Group in the Southwest Pacific, he found himself staring at his new aircraft, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Twin engines, counter-rotating propellers, and an armament powerful enough to shred bombers in seconds. For Bong, it was love at first sight. The P-38 wasn't just fast, it was unforgiving. It demanded balance, precision, and patience, the very traits Bong had spent his life mastering. As he took off from Australia on his first mission, the sky didn't feel foreign. It felt like home. In that moment, Richard Bong wasn't the shy farm boy from Wisconsin anymore. He was a fighter pilot, and the Pacific skies were about to meet the quiet genius of a man who never learned to quit. The humid air of New Guinea pressed thick against the cockpit glass as Richard Bong guided his P-38. Lightning through low-lying clouds. Below him, the jungle canopy stretched endlessly, broken only by winding rivers that glimmered like steel under the tropical sun. It was early 1943, and the Allies were clawing their way north, island by island, toward the heart of the Japanese Empire. For the men of the 49th Fighter Group, every mission meant a battle for survival. Bong's first encounters with the enemy were a shock, not because of fear, but because of the chaos. Japanese Zeros were agile, swift, and flown by veterans who had dominated the Pacific skies since Pearl Harbor. They struck fast and vanished faster. The first time Bong faced them, his P-38 shook violently under enemy fire. He barely escaped, returning to base with bullet holes stitched across his wings and the smell of burnt oil in the cockpit. But that flight taught him something crucial. The Zeros were fast, yes, but fragile. Their lightweight design, which made them nimble, also made them vulnerable. One burst from his 20mm cannon could tear them apart. Bong studied them obsessively, how they turned, how they climbed, how their pilots thought. He began to understand the rhythm of aerial combat, the split-second timing that separated life from death. Soon, he developed his own method, the boom and zoom. Instead of engaging in tight dogfights, he used the P-38's superior speed and dive capability. He'd strike from above, unleash a short, devastating burst, and climb away before the enemy could react. It was clean, precise, and brutally effective. The other pilots noticed. "That farm boy's got ice in his veins," one of his wingmen said after Bong downed 3 Zeros in a single day. But Bong never boasted. He simply smiled shyly and walked back to his tent, his flight suit still damp with sweat. What set Bong apart wasn't aggression, it was control. He didn't chase glory, he chased perfection. Every shot mattered, every maneuver was calculated. He flew as though the sky itself were a machine to be studied, mastered, and respected. But the pressure mounted. Each mission grew deadlier, each enemy more desperate. His commanders, recognizing his skill, began assigning him to escort bombers deep into enemy territory. These were brutal flights, long hours of monotony broken by seconds of chaos. Bong would fly high above the formation, scanning constantly for specks on the horizon. Sometimes they were clouds, sometimes they were Zeros, and sometimes they were death. One morning over Leh, a formation of Japanese fighters dove out of the sun. The bombers were sitting ducks. Bong reacted instantly, throttling forward, rolling into a steep dive. His cannons roared. 1 Zero burst into flames. Another spiraled out of control, but a third latched onto his tail, riddling his fuselage with bullets. Bong yanked the P-38 into a sharp climb, engines screaming. The pursuing Zero stalled and dropped away. When Bong landed back at base, his ground crew counted over 70 bullet holes in his aircraft. That night, as he sat on an ammo crate cleaning his pistol in silence, a fellow pilot asked him, "You ever get scared up there, Dick?" Bong smiled faintly. "Every time," he said. "But the trick is, don't let it touch your hands." By mid-1943, his kill count was rising rapidly. Each mission pushed him closer to legend. But the skies were changing, the Japanese were adapting, and Bong's fame was beginning to spread even among his enemies. The hunter was becoming hunted, and the quiet farm boy from Wisconsin was about to find himself in a storm that would test not just his skill, but his soul. The morning sun rose over the steaming jungles of the Pacific, painting the clouds a pale gold as Bong and his wingman, Major Thomas "Tommy" Lynch, took off from their dusty strip at Dobadura. The airfield was barely more than packed mud and pierced palm trunks, but it was home. Ahead of them, 250 miles north, lay Wewak, a Japanese stronghold teeming with fighters and anti-aircraft guns. The mission was simple on paper: disrupt enemy supply convoys and engage any aircraft encountered. In reality, it was suicide. The P-38s thundered low over the coast, their silver bodies glinting in the early light. Bong flew lead. He always did. His concentration was razor-sharp. Every vibration, every engine tone, every shift of wind through the canopy felt like part of him. The cockpit was his world. Outside it, death waited, circling like a hawk. Halfway to the target, his radio crackled. "Bandits, 11 o'clock high!" Bong looked up, black dots swarming in the distance, descending fast. Dozens of Zeros. The ambush had begun. He rolled hard right, breaking formation. The Zeros sliced through the air, their guns blazing. Tracer rounds streaked past his canopy. Bong's instincts took over. He pulled into a climb, forcing the P-38 into a steep vertical ascent. 2 Zeros followed, a fatal mistake. Bong inverted, slammed the throttle, and came diving down in a screaming arc. His cannons thundered. The first Zero exploded midair, scattering debris across the sky. The second tried to break away, too late. Bong's rounds tore through its fuselage. "Splash two!" Bong shouted, but the sky was chaos. Tommy Lynch's voice came through, strained. "I've got 3 on me! Can't shake them!" Bong banked left, scanning frantically. Below him, 3 Japanese fighters were locked on Lynch's tail, chewing his plane apart. Bong dove again, closing fast. His gun sights flashed red, 1 burst, and a Zero disintegrated. Lynch managed to roll away, his P-38 smoking. Then Bong's warning light blinked, fuel line damage. His right engine coughed, sputtered. Smoke began trailing behind him. He was too deep over enemy territory to turn back. The radio filled with shouts, orders to retreat. But Bong ignored them. His focus narrowed to a single thought. Not yet. Another group of Zeros appeared ahead, escorting a formation of Japanese bombers headed toward Allied positions. Bong knew he couldn't catch them all, but he could break their attack. He pushed the throttle to the stops, his remaining engine howling in protest. The P-38 surged forward, shaking violently as it clawed for altitude. At 12,000 feet, he was above them. Perfect. He rolled inverted and dove. The world blurred. Sky, sun, earth all melting into a single rushing tunnel. Bong squeezed the trigger. The P-38's nose guns unleashed hell. 1 bomber erupted into flame. Another veered off course, plummeting toward the jungle below. The escort scattered, breaking formation. Bong leveled out, barely 100 feet above the treetops. His controls were heavy, his right engine coughing its last breaths. For a moment there was silence. Just the wind, the smell of oil, and the heartbeat pounding in his ears. He'd done it. He'd stopped the attack alone. When he limped back to base that afternoon, his mechanics could scarcely believe the sight. His plane looked like it had flown through hell, holes peppering the wings, smoke still curling from the engine. Yet Bong stepped out calmly, his flight suit soaked through, eyes bright. Someone handed him a canteen. "You're insane, Dick," he grinned. "Maybe, but it works." That single mission earned him 2 more confirmed kills and a reputation that spread across the Pacific like wildfire. To his comrades, he was no longer just a brilliant pilot. He was something else, something the Japanese now whispered in their briefings. Beware the twin-tail devil. And the devil was only getting started. By late 1944, Major Richard Ira Bong had become a living legend among the men stationed in the South Pacific. His name echoed through briefing tents and mess halls, the quiet farm boy who'd turned into the deadliest pilot in the air. But behind that soft-spoken smile and calm voice was a man running on the edge of exhaustion. Every mission meant another set of risks. Every kill meant another piece of his soul chipped away. Still, Bong kept flying, not for glory, not even for medals, but for something simpler. He wanted to bring his squadron home alive. The 49th Fighter Group had grown to depend on him like a compass. Whenever Bong led, their confidence rose. But that also made him a target. The Japanese knew his aircraft markings, the twin-boomed P-38 Marge, with his fiancée's photo painted neatly beneath the canopy. They called it the ghost plane. Whenever it appeared, chaos followed. On October 10, 1944, the weather over the Philippines was brutal. Thick monsoon clouds, low visibility, rain slashing the cockpit glass. Bong sat strapped in, scanning his instruments as his Lightning climbed through turbulence. The mission was to escort bombers striking enemy airfields around Clark. Halfway there, his wingman crackled over the radio. Visibility dropping. "Can't see the formation," Bong replied, voice steady. "Stay close on my light. We'll climb through it." They broke through the top of the storm into dazzling sunlight and directly into a swarm of Japanese fighters. A dozen, maybe more, diving fast. The first burst of gunfire ripped across Bong's left wing. He rolled sharply, breaking away. The radio erupted in panic. Tracers cut through the clouds like streaks of fire. Bong's calm voice came through the chaos. "Break left." "I'll take high cover!" He throttled up, looping above the dogfight, then dove straight into the swarm. His P-38 roared through the formation, guns blazing. A Zero disintegrated in front of him. Another tried to climb above, but Bong was already there, cutting across its path and firing a short burst. The enemy aircraft exploded in a ball of fire. "Two down," Bong muttered, adjusting trim. But the fight wasn't over. A sharp clang echoed through his fuselage. Cannon fire had hit his left engine. Smoke filled the cockpit. Bong coughed, wiping his goggles clear, forcing the throttle forward with one hand while feathering the damaged propeller with the other. The P-38 shuddered violently, threatening to spin out. For any other pilot, it would have been the end. But Bong's touch was surgical. He used the weight imbalance to roll into a diving turn, disappearing into the cloud layer below. The enemy pilots lost him instantly. He leveled out at 3,000 feet, breath heavy, instruments flickering. His wingman's voice broke through the static. "Boss, where are you?" "Still flying," Bong replied quietly. He limped his crippled Lightning back toward base, one engine dead, the other whining from overstrain. Below him stretched the endless green expanse of jungle, and beyond that, the faint glimmer of the airstrip. As he landed, the ground crew sprinted toward him, waving their arms. His plane was riddled with holes, landing gear barely holding. Bong cut the engine, unbuckled, and climbed down. The base commander approached, shaking his head. "You keep flying like this," he said. "You're not coming back one day." Bong smiled faintly. "If I don't fly, they don't come back either." That night, rain hammered the tin roofs of the barracks. Bong sat by his cot, writing a letter to Marge back home. His hands trembled, but his words were steady. "I'm fine. Don't worry. Just a little excitement today. The boys here are doing great. Every day, I think of you, and it keeps me flying." He folded the letter neatly, sealing it with a quiet sigh. Outside, thunder rolled across the jungle. Inside, the man who'd become America's deadliest ace closed his eyes, knowing tomorrow he'd take off again. November 11th, 1944. Veterans Day. The irony wasn't lost on Major Richard Bong as he tightened his harness inside Marge. The mission briefing had been short. Escort B-24 bombers striking Japanese supply convoys near Leyte Gulf. But intelligence had reported something unusual. A large concentration of enemy fighters forming near the coastline. Bong didn't need to be told what that meant. The Japanese were planning to throw everything they had left into the air. The sky was bruised with dawn when the P-38s took off. Engines roared, shaking the ground. Bong led the formation, his aircraft shimmering silver against the pale horizon. Below, the ocean stretched endlessly, its surface calm, a deceptive stillness before the storm. 20 minutes into the mission, his radio crackled. "Bandits, 2 o'clock high!" Multiple contacts, 20, maybe 30. Bong's eyes narrowed. "All right, boys, keep your spacing. Protect the bombers." The formation scattered as dark specks appeared ahead. Zeros, Oscars, and Chi-61 Tonys diving fast out of the sun. The air suddenly filled with contrails, tracer lines, and the violent chatter of machine guns. Bong rolled hard, pulling into a climb, then kicked the rudder to slide behind an enemy fighter. He squeezed the trigger. A burst of .50 caliber fire tore through the Zero's fuselage, flames erupting from its engine. He barely had time to watch it fall before another came straight at him head-on. He didn't flinch. He yanked the throttle forward and held his fire until the last possible second. The enemy's nose filled his gun sight, then Bong fired. The two planes screamed past each other in a near collision, the Japanese aircraft exploding in a flash behind him. "Two down," Bong called. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. Below him, one of the bombers was trailing smoke. A Japanese fighter latched onto its tail. Bong dove, engine howling, guns blazing in long, measured bursts. The Japanese pilot tried to roll away. Too late. The P-38's fire tore through his canopy, sending the aircraft spiraling into the sea. "Bomber 3, you're clear," Bong radioed. The B-24's crew replied with a broken cheer. But the fight was far from over. The air was chaos, streaks of fire, flashes of silver, smoke trails crisscrossing the sky. Bong's wingman shouted, "Boss! You've got one on your 6. Bong jerked the stick left, then right, throwing Marge into a brutal corkscrew. Tracers zipped past his canopy. He dove sharply, leveling out just above the waves, spray lashing the windshield. He could almost feel the bullets stitching through the air behind him. At the last moment, he pulled up, climbing hard into a loop. The Zero followed, and that was its mistake. Bong rolled over at the top and dropped behind his pursuer. His guns roared again. The enemy plane vanished in a puff of smoke and flame. That made 3. When the sky finally cleared, the radio fell silent except for the low hum of surviving engines. Bong took a long breath, scanning the empty horizon. The bombers were safe. The Japanese formation, destroyed. Back at base, when Bong landed, his ground crew could hardly believe what they saw. His aircraft was riddled with holes, fuel almost gone. The commander approached, shaking his head in disbelief. "Bong," he said, "that's 3 more. That makes 38. The major just nodded, stepping down from his cockpit, face streaked with sweat and oil. "Just doing my job." But that night, alone in the operations hut, Bong sat by a dim lantern, staring at the mission board. He could feel the weight of every flight, every risk. 2 more kills, and he'd break the all-time record. But the truth was, It didn't matter to him anymore. Outside, thunder rumbled again. The kind of storm that rolled through the tropics like war itself. Bong rubbed his tired eyes, whispering to himself, just 2 more, and maybe I can stop. He didn't yet know it, but the next mission would change everything. December 15th, 1944, Clark Field, Luzon. The tropical heat pressed down like a physical weight as Major Richard Bong climbed into Marge for what would be his 41st combat sortie. The airfield buzzed with energy, crews shouting, engines roaring, dust whipping across the tarmac. The Japanese were desperate now, launching near-suicidal attacks to slow the American advance. For Bong, the mission was simple. Intercept and destroy a squadron of enemy aircraft threatening Allied supply convoys over the South China Sea. But inside, he felt something different today. Something heavy. He'd been told to ease back. "You've done enough, Dick," General Kenny had said that morning, hand on Bong's shoulder. "You're a national hero now. You've earned a desk, not another dogfight." Bong just smiled faintly. "Sir, the war's not over yet." He walked to his aircraft slowly, every step echoing against the metallic hum of the airfield. The mechanics had painted another Japanese flag under the canopy glass, marking his 38th victory. 2 more, and he'd officially surpass every other American ace in history. But numbers didn't mean much to him anymore. Each one was another life taken, another reminder of how thin the line was between survival and fire. The mission launched at 0900 hours. The P-38s climbed through thick tropical clouds, twin tails slicing through mist that shimmered in the rising sun. The radio cracked alive as the lead navigator called out bearings. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Japanese fighters were coming, fast. Then the warning came. Bandits. 11 o'clock high, 20 plus. Bong gripped the control stick. "All right, boys, let's dance." They met head-on, 2 flocks of steel and fury colliding in the open sky. Bong banked hard left, looping through the formation. His vision blurred as G-forces pressed him against his seat. A 0 flashed across his nose. He fired a burst, watched the enemy wing shear off clean. The plane tumbling into the sea of clouds below, 1. A second 0 latched onto a friendly Lightning, its guns blazing. Bong rolled inverted, dived beneath, and came up behind it. His thumb pressed the trigger. The twin 50s and 20mm cannons spoke in unison. The 0 disintegrated mid-air. 2. His heart was pounding now, not from fear but from instinct. Every sense sharpened. Every motion felt preordained, smooth, calculated, lethal. This wasn't luck anymore. This was mastery. "Bong, break right. You've got 2 on your tail." He rolled sharply, feeling bullets rip through his left wing. He could smell burning oil. Without thinking, he dropped flaps, slowed suddenly. The pursuers shot past him. He pulled the trigger again. Flames, smoke, silence. The sky was chaos, a ballet of destruction. For 20 minutes, the battle raged, twisting through cloud banks and sunlight. By the end, Bong's hands trembled, his oxygen mask soaked with sweat. His ammunition was almost gone, and Marge was coughing smoke. But the sky was clear. The Japanese were gone. When he landed, the ground crew rushed forward, eyes wide. The left engine was scorched, fuselage riddled with holes. A mechanic shouted, "Major, you shouldn't even be alive!" Bong smiled faintly, removing his helmet. Neither should they. Later that night, the official report came in. Bong had shot down 2 confirmed aircraft and damaged a 3rd, bringing his total to 40 victories. It was official. He was America's top fighter ace. The mess hall erupted in cheers when the announcement came, men slapping his back, photographers lining up. Someone handed him a glass of whiskey. Another started singing Yankee Doodle. But Bong didn't feel victorious. He just stood quietly by the window, looking out at the rain-soaked runway. He remembered faces, the pilots who hadn't returned, the friends lost in smoke and fire. He whispered to himself, 40. That's enough. The next morning, orders came down from General MacArthur himself. Major Richard Bong was to be grounded, effective immediately. His combat days were over, but fate, as it always does in war, wasn't done with him yet. January 1945, Burbank, California. The war still raged across the Pacific, but Major Richard Bong was finally home. No gunfire, no burning skies, just the steady hum of engines from the Lockheed factory floor. The brass had pulled him back to the States, calling it an honor assignment. His mission now was to test new fighter aircraft and demonstrate them for the War Department. Officially, he was still serving. Unofficially, he was being protected. Too valuable a hero to risk. To everyone else, it looked like paradise. A clean bed, civilians smiling, no tracer rounds cutting the sky. Yet Bong felt like he'd been grounded in more ways than one. Every night he'd lie awake hearing the echoes of machine guns and the whine of engines. His fiancée, Marge Vattendahl, the same woman whose name adorned his P-38, tried to bring him peace. She'd sit beside him on their small porch, the California sunset glowing orange across his face. "You did your part," she'd tell him softly. "You don't need to prove anything anymore." He'd just smile, that quiet farm boy smile. "I know," he'd say, "but the skies still call." Bong had spent years living on adrenaline, constant motion, constant danger. Now the silence felt heavier than combat. He'd drive to the Lockheed airfield each morning, the smell of fuel filling his lungs like a drug. Rows of shining aircraft stretched across the tarmac, experimental jets, prototypes, the next generation of American air power. It was here that Bong first laid eyes on the P-80 Shooting Star, the United States' first operational jet fighter. Sleek, silver, fast, a glimpse of the future. The test pilots called it the rocket with wings. Bong was instantly fascinated. He'd read the reports, studied the controls, memorized the procedures. The irony wasn't lost on him. A man who'd once battled the Me-262 in Europe now stood ready to test its American successor. On February 17, 1945, Bong arrived early, long before the other pilots. The morning fog hung low over the runway, soft and still. Mechanics prepared the P-80, its turbines whining faintly. This was just a standard test flight, nothing unusual. But Bong seemed different that day. Colleagues would later recall how calm he was. No jokes, no nervous energy, just quiet focus. He checked his instruments twice, then looked to the horizon. "She's a beauty," he murmured. "Let's see what she can do." At 10:30 a.m., Bong climbed into the cockpit. He adjusted his headset, ran through the checklist, and gave a thumbs up to the tower. The jet rolled forward, engines spooling with a rising howl. For a brief moment he felt it again, that rush, that electricity in his veins. The sky opened before him like an old friend welcoming him home. The tower called out, "Shooting Star 1, you're cleared for takeoff." "Roger that," Bong replied. "Rolling now." The aircraft accelerated smoothly down the runway, its nose lifting as it broke free from the earth. Observers on the ground watched in awe, the silver jet climbing higher and higher into the cloudless blue. It was a perfect ascent, graceful and precise, exactly what they expected from America's greatest ace. But then, something went wrong. A faint trail of smoke appeared near the tail. The tower called out urgently, "Shooting Star 1, you're trailing smoke, confirm status." No response. The jet began to wobble, dipping slightly, then suddenly veered downward. The smoke thickened, black and oily. The crowd below froze, disbelief turning to horror. Bong's aircraft plummeted from 500 feet, disappearing behind a hangar in a violent flash of orange and gray. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then a single voice broke the silence. "My God!" Its Major Bong fire crews raced toward the wreckage, but it was too late. The P-80 had exploded on impact. Richard Ira Bong, America's top fighter ace, the farm boy who had conquered the Pacific skies, was gone. He died on February 17, 1945. The same day news broke that the United States had dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The headlines would share the same front page. And just like that, the skies went quiet. When the smoke cleared at Lockheed Field, the world lost not just a man, but a symbol. Major Richard Ira Bong had represented everything Americans wanted to believe about their young heroes. Courage without arrogance, skill without cruelty, patriotism without ego. His death sent shockwaves through both the military and civilian world. The newspapers called him the ace of aces. Yet for those who'd known him, it wasn't the 40 enemy planes he downed that defined him. It was the humility behind every victory. Back in Wisconsin, the news reached his parents on a quiet summer evening. The telegram arrived just as his mother was setting the dinner table. She didn't need to read the words, one look at the uniformed officer on the porch, and she knew. Her son, the boy who once built model airplanes in the barn and spent hours watching clouds drift over the cornfields, would never come home again. America mourned. Streets in Wisconsin draped black ribbons across mailboxes. Farmers stopped their tractors as the news played on the radio. For a generation raised on stories of sacrifice, Bong's loss hit differently. He hadn't died in combat but in service to progress, testing the very technology that would define the post-war world. At Lockheed, engineers rebuilt the wreckage piece by piece, desperate to understand what went wrong. They found that a fuel pump had malfunctioned, a simple mechanical error. But that malfunction became a metaphor whispered across hangars and bases. Even the best can fall. Not from weakness, but from fate. General George Kenney, Bong's commanding officer and mentor, wept openly at the funeral, something rare for a man forged in war. In his eulogy, Kenney said softly, "He never fought for medals. He fought for the man flying beside him. He died doing what he loved, chasing the sky. Across the Pacific, men who had once faced Bong in battle were learning of his passing through intercepted Allied broadcasts. One Japanese ace reportedly bowed his head upon hearing the news. "He was the one we feared," he said quietly, "and the one we respected." Yet even in death, Bong's legend refused to fade. The U.S. Army Air Forces commissioned the Major Richard Bong Bridge connecting Wisconsin and Minnesota, a structure that still stands today, spanning the St. Louis River like a steel memorial in the clouds. His P-38 Marge was preserved, its aluminum skin reflecting the same sunlight he once flew beneath. Pilots who trained afterward would point to his photo and whisper, "That's who we learned from." But perhaps Bong's greatest legacy was invisible, carried not in museums or history books, but in the mindset he left behind. The farm boy trick that made him unstoppable wasn't about aggression. It was about patience, precision, and control. While others chased glory, Bong mastered restraint. He never fired blindly. He studied his enemy, waited, and struck only when success was certain. It was this calm, methodical approach that made him lethal, and it was born from his upbringing, from years of steady hands fixing engines on the family farm. His father once said, "Richard didn't want to be the best pilot in the world. He just wanted to be the safest." That's the irony. In chasing safety, he found greatness. Decades later, historians still study Bong's flight logs and training notes. Every maneuver, every angle of attack, every radio transmission reveals a man who saw air combat not as chaos, but as choreography. He turned war into something almost mathematical, terrifying in its efficiency, beautiful in its precision. And while many heroes of the Pacific faded into the fog of forgotten battles, Bong's name endures because he was proof that greatness could come from simplicity, that even a humble boy from a dairy farm could become the guardian of the skies. His story wasn't one of destiny, it was one of determination, and though the world moved on, the sky he ruled would never quite feel the same again. Years later, when the roar of piston engines had long faded and jet age dawned, Richard Bong's story was still being told, not as a tale of war, but of heart. Children in small Wisconsin schools learned about the quiet boy who loved the sky more than anything. Veterans visiting museums would pause before his photo, a calm face under a pilot's cap, eyes focused somewhere far beyond the lens. In airfields across America, young cadets still hear his name during training. "Fly like Bong," instructors say, meaning be disciplined, be calm, be sure. He became more than a war hero. He became a philosophy. His approach to flying, precision, patience, control, became the backbone of modern aerial combat doctrine. The old P-38 Marge now sits gleaming in a museum, its polished metal wings reflecting the ceiling lights like frozen sunlight. Tourists stop, read the plaque, and realize this was the machine that carried a farm boy to immortality. And somewhere in the hush of that hangar, it's easy to imagine the faint hum of twin Allison engines, and a young man's voice whispering through the static, "Keep her steady. Wait for your moment. Now." He died before he could see the peace he fought for, but perhaps that's what makes his story timeless. Richard Bong's victories weren't only measured in aircraft destroyed, but in lives protected, in skies made safer. The world will always remember the ace of aces, the man who fought not for glory, but for mastery. Because long after the gunfire stopped and the medals gathered dust, his legacy still soars, every time a pilot looks at the clouds and believes, as he once did, that even a farm boy can conquer the sky.